Welcome back, everyone, for our third session today for our Early Intervention Forum. Now we will be having Erin Hale and Karen Kincaid from DCY presenting on From Connection to Collaboration, Strengthening IFSPs Through Relationship-Based Practices. I'm going to introduce them with their bios and then hand it over to them for the presentation. Erin Hale is a member of the Ohio Early Intervention Policy Team, serving as a monitoring consultant and policy specialist. She earned her Bachelor of Science degree in Healthcare Management from Franklin University in 2017. Born and raised in Morgan County, Erin previously served as the county's Ohio EI Service Coordinator and Contract Manager before joining the state EI team in 2021. Erin is deeply passionate about advocating for children and families and is especially committed to improving access to resources and services in rural areas throughout the state. Karen has served as an Ohio Early Intervention Regional Program Consultant since 2017. She holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in Child and Family Development from the University of Akron and is a licensed social worker in Ohio. Karen is a credentialed through the Ohio Department of Developmental Disabilities as a developmental specialist and certified through the Family, Infant, and Preschool program as a Fidelity coach. With over 25 years of experience in the EI field, her career has included roles as a developmental specialist, a certified play project consultant, a Help Me Grow service coordinator, and work in the field of child welfare. Welcome, Erin and Karen. I will now hand it over to Erin.
I'll turn on my audio. Thank you, Erica. We want to take a minute and just thank everyone for joining us for today's session to really talk about how your strong relationships with families contribute to strengthening the IFSPs that we developed. Before we get started, we're going to go over a few housekeeping slides. There we go. So if you have questions today, go ahead and feel free to type those into the Q&A box. The chat has been disabled, so make sure that you're putting those into the Q&A. And also be sure to include your name and your county. We're going to try to keep track of those as we move along, and we'll try to get to those and provide answers if time permits at the end of the webinar. If we do run short on time, we will definitely follow up to make sure that your questions are answered. This webinar is being recorded and will be later posted to the OACB YouTube channel. CPDUs are available through OACB's Member Connect. For those that are attending today's live session, CPDUs will not be available for viewing the recording. If you happen to run into any technical issues throughout the webinar, make sure that you're using your computer audio. If you continue to have any audio issues, you may want to try plugging in and using a headset. You could also try closing out any open apps that you may have open. And if all else fails, try logging out and then logging back into Zoom. If you continue to have trouble, just type that into the Q&A and we will do our best to troubleshoot as we go. So today's objectives are to first identify why relationships are foundational to high quality IFSP development. And then to understand the role of the EI team in developing and fostering those strong relationships. We also want to learn strategies that will help us to build authentic connections with families, especially during that initial 45-day process. And then finally, we want to explore how to incorporate authentic assessment information into the IFSP. So we know that how services are delivered in early intervention is just as important as what is delivered. And this was a quote that I feel like kind of sums it all up. So it's a quote from Maya Angelou that says, "People will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel." So I would like you to keep that in mind as we move through today's webinar. So we know that building a relationship with the family starts with that very first contact following a family's referral to early intervention. So we want to hear from you right now. What comes to mind when you think of building relationships with families? How do you work to create that warm welcome for the family? If you could take a second and go ahead and enter your responses into the Q&A, and then we will share out some of those responses that we receive. Okay, so we've got active listening, empathy, listening, being judgment-free, which is very important, establishing common ground. I really like that one. Listening again, listening is so important. Let them lead in order to build trust. Listening, supporting them, being non-judgmental, being non-biased, building that rapport. I like this one from Stephanie, using reflective listening skills on that very first phone call. Pamela says, putting myself into their shoes. Listening and connecting, making them feel seen and heard, meeting them where they are. Trust, making them feel comfortable and not judged. You guys are hitting the nail on the head with these. Communicating using words so that they understand, show more than talking. We know that many of the things that we're going to talk about today are things that you are already doing, but we hope that there's at least one thing that you can get out of this that you would like to try moving forward. So the mission of EI represents that broad overarching purpose of family-centered early intervention services, which is to really build on and provide supports and resources to assist family members and caregivers to enhance children's learning and development through everyday learning opportunities. Family engagement refers to that relationship-based, mutual, and responsive partnerships between families and EI professionals to promote children's development, learning, and wellness. The premise is that it includes families as leaders and advocates for their child. And it happens when EI professionals and families actively participate in an ongoing process of building and maintaining meaningful relationships. So the Division of Early Childhood, or DEC, has recommended practices which represent the essential or highest impact practices within early intervention. So those that are shown to promote positive outcomes for infants and toddlers who are either at risk of having a developmental delay or disability, or who do have a developmental disability or delay, and their families. Essentially, the practices that provide the biggest bang for the buck. So the family-focused practices, which are the ones that we are covering here, consist of activities that promote engagement and active participation. They lead to the development of a high-quality IFSP and ultimately support families in achieving their outcomes. So some of the family practices are that practitioners build trusting and respectful relationships or partnerships with the family through interactions that are sensitive and responsive to cultural, linguistic, and socioeconomic diversity. Practitioners provide the family with up-to-date, comprehensive, and unbiased information in a way that the family can understand, and then use that to make informed choices and decisions. Practitioners are responsive to the family's concerns, priorities, and life-changing circumstances. Practitioners and the family work together to create outcomes or goals and develop individualized plans and implement practices that address the family's priorities and concerns and the child's strengths and needs. And families or practitioners help families know and understand their rights. We have a link to these at the end of the presentation. So if you have not reviewed the DEC recommended practices, there are other areas outside of the family-centered practices, along with what it looks like, doesn't look like, to give you an idea for each of the different areas. So as we move through this webinar today, we really want you to reflect on the practices that you use to form and foster relationships. How does what we're discussing connect to your current practice? Is there anything that you would like to change or do differently moving forward? The first 45 days following a referral to EI is a really critical period for teams to build trust and gather authentic assessment information. While we know it's a really, really busy time in terms of the various activities that need to be completed, We really encourage you to shift the focus and view it as an opportunity for teams to work on building a strong relationship with the family. We know that there are multiple opportunities to engage with the family, from initial contact to that first intake visit that you have with the family, to the evaluation and the child assessment, the family directed assessment, and then finally that initial IFSP. How can each of us really ensure that we are being intentional and making the most of each of those interactions that we have with a family? Those early connections are so important. A positive experience during that first 45 days following referral is really what lays the foundation for long-term engagement and sets the tone for the rest of the family's journey within EI. Those trusting relationships are ultimately what are going to create space for families to open up and feel comfortable being vulnerable about their challenges, what they would like support with. And then that information is then critical to really being able to develop an individualized IFSP that really reflects the unique strengths and needs of each child and family that we serve. So keep in mind that it is during this time that families often decide whether EI feels supportive or overwhelming. So forming and fostering strong relationships with families is really at the heart of early intervention. We know that young children learn and develop through their relationships with the most important people in their lives. For the population that we work with, which is infants and toddlers, the most important people would be their parents and caregivers. So our ability as EI professionals to work with parents is just as important as the expertise that we have in our respective area. The relationships that we build with families are important and matter for a number of reasons. First of which is that they build the foundation for the family's participation. When families are able to trust their EI team and feel heard, respected, and understood early on in the process, they're more likely to feel comfortable participating and sharing their concerns, their routines, their values, and their priorities. A trusting relationship also creates a space for families to be honest about any challenges that they are experiencing and what they would like support with. Again, this is going to lead to IFSP outcomes that are functional, relevant, and family-driven, which in turn is going to increase the likelihood that that parent is going to continue to participate and engage in services. Next, strong relationships enhance the quality of functional assessment. Functional assessment is reliant on observing the child in their natural environments and routines and understanding how they participate within their daily life. Families are more likely to allow that authentic access to their routines and daily experiences when they trust you as their provider. Trust leads to richer, more accurate information that directly informs those IFSP outcomes and strategies that we create. Strong relationships also promote cultural responsiveness. Establishing that trust allows the team to learn about and honor each family's culture, language, and caregiving practices and beliefs. When teams are able to approach families in a respectful manner and one that is non-judgmental, families are more comfortable opening up and sharing information that impacts their child's development or the way that they care for their child. It also supports caregiver capacity building. The goal of EI is not for us to come in and deliver strategies, but to really build the parents' confidence and skills to support their child by acknowledging, supporting, and encouraging their knowledge and efforts. Parents are the expert on their child. It's important for us as teams to validate the important role that parents and caregivers play in their child's life. So that strong relationship is what's going to create a safe environment for parents to do trial and error, where they feel supported and encouraged to experiment, reflect, and then adjust. Finally, strong relationships lay the groundwork for that long-term engagement throughout the rest of their journey in early intervention. So a positive experience during that 45-day process really sets the tone for the rest of the family's journey in EI. When they trust their team, they're more likely to follow through with their scheduled visits or appointments, communicate openly and honestly, and stay engaged throughout the rest of their time. There's another quote that I thought was important that is, People don't care how much you know until they know that you care. And how true is that in the field that we work in? I mean, families need to know that we care before they're going to be invested and open up and feel comfortable. So as an EI professional, you can be an expert and have all the knowledge in the world, but it really means nothing if you aren't able to first establish that strong relationship with the family. So who has a role in fostering and forming those strong relationships with families? That would be everyone who comes into contact with that family. While there are a number of strategies that teams can use to foster and form strong relationships, some of the key strategies that we really wanted to touch on today include treating families with respect and empathy, providing clear and consistent communication, demonstrating reliability and trustworthiness, partnering with families in assessment and planning, supporting families emotionally and practically, and encouraging two-way information sharing. We're going to now kind of walk through and take a deeper look at each one of these. So one of the most important strategies that we can really use to build those strong relationships with families is to treat each family with respect and empathy. So we want you to take a minute and think of a challenging family that you've either worked with in the past or that you're working with now, and then keep them in mind as we progress through these next few slides. How do you work to build trust and rapport with that family who may live differently or has different values and beliefs than you, or even parents differently? How are you able to check your own assumptions or biases when engaging with families about their child? So to establish trust and rapport, we do this by being kind, showing a genuine interest in the family, and then acknowledging that important role that the parent and the caregiver plays in their child's development. Parents are the experts and they know the most. We also want to practice active listening, as so many of you said, when we asked for your strategies. We want to listen to the family's concerns, priorities, and hopes for their child without judgment. We also want to be mindful of both our verbal and our nonverbal communication. So what is your body language saying when you're with the family? Are you maintaining eye contact? Are you looking down at your computer or your notes? Are you leaning forward, nodding to show that you're really listening and hearing what they're saying? We also want to limit distractions. Silence your cell phones before you go into a video visit so that you are able to really dedicate that full attention to the family and the conversation. We can also show active listening by using open-ended questions and then providing the space for families to actually respond and allow them the time to speak before we jump in to provide information or suggestions. Another critical piece of this is timing. We don't want families to feel like we're rushing through something. So make sure that you're scheduling at a time when you know that you have the time and you're not going to be rushed. The family does pick up on that. That could be in-person phone calls, just making sure that you're considering that and being mindful. Another aspect of treating families with respect and empathy is really using a family-centered approach, which is placing families at the heart of services and supports. During those early contacts, allow the family to guide the pace and the direction of the conversations. Part of what makes EI interesting is that it provides an opportunity to meet, learn about, and work with families from all backgrounds and walks of life. Acknowledging each family's unique journey and strengths by taking the time to really learn about them, respect the family's culture, their routines, and their language preferences. What matters most to them? If a family happens to need a translator or an interpreter, we also want to make sure that we're providing that. So another strategy to build those strong relationships is to provide clear, consistent communication. So thinking about that family that's, challenging, how does your communication style impact that relationship? How do you take into consideration and maybe even adjust your approach based on the family's communication style? Every family is going to learn differently. They're going to want different things. And so it's important that we acknowledge that and kind of adjust our own practices to be able to best provide the services that they need. Timely contact is so important to this, providing clear and consistent communication. Following the referral to EI and then making that contact in a timely manner, but then continuing to be responsive after that, whether the family's calls, texts, emails. Take the time in advance to confirm your visits ahead of time. And then if there is a schedule change or something comes up, be sure that you're taking the time to communicate that to the family so they're not just left waiting. We also want to ensure that we're explaining the EI process in a language that each family will understand, breaking down those timelines, explaining each activity, parent rights, and the next steps. We want families to be fully informed of what's going to happen, when, and why. It's also important to be mindful about when we provide information. So rather than overwhelming parents and explaining every consent form on that intake visit, why not focus on what's needed at that moment? And then as we continue to walk the family through the rest of the process, we can provide additional information when it makes the most sense. And there's actually context for the family to understand the information. We also want to check in with the family to make sure that they understand the information that we're communicating, and then provide opportunities for them to ask questions. Offer multiple modes of communication. So there's not going to be a one-size-fits-all approach that works with all families. It's important for us as teams to really find out how families prefer to communicate, whether that's phone, text, email, in person, the best time to reach them, and then also the frequency. Maybe they want check-ins once a month. Maybe they would like to have a check-in bi-weekly, and be really finding out what it is that the family wants. Demonstrating reliability and trustworthiness is another key strategy that we can really use to build strong relationships during those early times when families are referred to EI. So thinking back to that challenging families, in what ways do you show them that you're reliable and trustworthy? Families we know are often managing a lot of unknowns when they enter EI. When we take the time to really demonstrate reliability and trustworthiness, we're helping to ensure that EI is not one of those unknowns. So how do we do this? Well, we follow through with our commitments. Do what you say you're going to do. If that's sharing resources or making referrals or providing information or sending forms. It also means arriving on time and responding to families in a timely manner. Again, if something comes up, just ensure that you're communicating that with the family. Be transparent. We want to set realistic expectations for families about what EI is, what it can provide, and what it cannot provide. It's also okay for you to acknowledge if you don't know the answer to something. Just assure the family that you'll find the answer and follow up with them. We also want to strive for consistency. I think families really find comfort in seeing the same team members again and again whenever possible. We know this isn't always possible, but whenever possible, we want to make sure that they have that consistency to who they're meeting, who's coming to their home, avoiding frequent or unnecessary changes in service coordinators or providers. Another aspect of consistency is making sure that everyone on the team is on the same page as far as the information that we're sharing with the family, as this is going to help prevent conflicting information and causing confusion on the part of the family. We also want to protect the family's confidentiality. Families share a lot of personal information with us, and it's important that we handle that information with care and take the time to explain how and why it's going to be used. Another component of this is also ensuring that we obtain their written informed consent before we share information about the family with anyone who is outside of the EI team. So partnering with families in assessment and planning is another strategy we can use to really build and foster those strong relationships. Family-centered assessment goes beyond just identifying the child's delays and deficits. It's really about gaining an understanding of the child's strengths, their weaknesses, and their needs within the context of that family's daily life and routines. So thinking back to that most challenging family that you've worked with, how does your action show them that you value their partnership? In what ways do you show families that you view them as the expert on their child? Sometimes it's easy when you're working with a family that it's easy to connect to. It's often more difficult, and you have to be more mindful when you're working with a family where it is more challenging to connect with them and form that relationship. So we want to involve the family in planning and conducting the assessment, explaining and ensuring that the family understands the assessment, what its purpose is, and what to expect. Schedule the assessment at a time and a place that works best for the family. We also want to consider what's most appropriate for the family when selecting the assessment tools. Are we flexible and open to using different tools or methods to assess them based on the child and family's needs? We know that with evaluation, we have two tools that we can use. Assessment, we have so many more options. So are we using the various tools that we have in our toolkit for assessment? Or are we really just sticking with the same one over and over again? Whenever possible, we want to conduct those assessments in natural environments so that the team can really get an accurate picture of how the child is functioning and interacting in their real life situations. We also want to encourage the family to actively participate in the assessment, and that could be based on what they're most comfortable with, whether that's sharing videos with the team or actually providing information with the team through interview. Partnering with the family also means listening to the family's concerns and priorities. What do they want to achieve as a result of EI? What does a typical day look like? What's working well? What's challenging? Where do they need support? We want to position the family as an equal partner. Assessment is an ongoing process. So we want as teams to be flexible and maintain that open communication with the family, check in on progress, address any new concerns that may come up, and then be able to update the IFSP if and when that's needed. We also want to highlight the child and family strengths, rather than only focusing on the deficits and delays. When we take the time to point out and comment on the things that a child does well, it helps the parent and the caregiver begin to notice those things as well. The goal of EI is not to really just fix the child's delays. It's to support and empower the parents and the caregivers to enhance their child's development. Sometimes the relationships and the connections that we have with a parent or a caregiver is so much more meaningful and impactful than any service that we could provide. Supporting families emotionally and practically. I would say that this is one aspect of EI that sets our program apart, that we don't just focus on the child, we focus on the entire family. So thinking back to that challenging family, how do you check in on the whole family? How do you celebrate their wins? One of the ways that we can provide support to families, especially early on in the process, is to acknowledge and validate their feelings. Normalize the emotions that we know that many families come into EI with: guilt, worry, fear, frustration. We also want to work on building the family's capacity to access any needed resources, such as sharing information about like community supports, childcare options, parent support groups, etc. Ultimately, this is going to help to build the parent or the caregiver's capacity to meet their needs when EI is no longer around. As I said, we want to consider the needs of the family as the whole, not just focusing on the child. Celebrate the wins. And then this is one that I cannot stress enough. The importance of recognizing those small successes children and families make. Families often report that it's difficult. They're with their child all day, every day. So sometimes it's difficult for them to see that. You know, when we come in and we point out the changes or the progress that we've seen since the last time we've seen them, I think it goes a long way and it has a huge impact on the family. So a quick pause and reflect. So what are some ways, some small but impactful ways that your team can support families emotionally and practically during that initial 45-day process? The last strategy that we're going to talk about is encouraging that two-way information sharing. Relationships require reciprocity. We know that they're a two-way, it requires effort on both parts. So a key aspect of this is inviting families to share what's important to them. This is how we learn what matters most to the family. As EI professionals, we also want to take the time to observe and reflect, sharing what you see during visits, and then asking for the parent's perspective. Is this what it typically looks like? How does what we're seeing compare to what you typically see? Encourage your mutual decision-making by acknowledging and validating that the parent, again, is the expert. If a family says that a child is doing something, but we didn't see it while we were there, are we taking that family's word for that? We also want to position the families as equal partners in developing the IFSP and creating outcomes. This is their plan. Ask what strategies they've already tried, what worked, what didn't work. Use their insights to really guide IFSP development and service planning. We also want to write outcomes in the family's words, reflecting what is most meaningful to them. Check that the outcomes make sense to the family and that it represents their circumstances and their priorities. And as always, we want to be flexible and willing to revisit together and then make adjustments based on what's working well or the family's evolving needs. So one more time, thinking back to that challenging family, what practices do you use to invite and encourage families to share information? I'm now going to turn it over to Karen.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. I want to start with just a reflection of Erin went over some really great information. So, thinking about all of the families that we serve and how do you attempt to re engage a family if you lose contact or they stop responding? Does it look different if you're within the 45 days or if the IFSP has been signed? If families are not responding or suddenly stop engaging, are we taking the time to ask ourselves if we missed something? Dr. Gallen stated in one of his motivational interviewing trainings, if a family is not responding, if they're canceling visits or not home for our visits, we need to ask ourselves if we got it right. Did we get that IFSP right? How does your team reflect on when in your process you lose families? How do you reflect on what you could have done differently? The IFSP is a reflection of the relationship that you have with the family. Take a minute to reflect on the difference between a family that you have a great connection with and one that you have struggled to connect with. How do those IFSPs look different? The IFSP is not just about services, it's about building the family's confidence and skills to support their child. The IFSP is a living document that reflects the team's understanding of the unique priorities, concerns, and resources and goals each family has. We know that families are more likely to engage and follow through when they are invested and have an active role in developing their IFSP. When a family is not engaged, it often leads to a generic, ineffective plan, which increases the chances that they won't be an active participant. A supervisor once shared with me that the IFSP should reflect all of the time that is spent getting to know the family. And if each section of the IFSP has basic information that is shared with like 1 to 2 sentences in each area, how does that reflect the time that you invested in getting to know the family? And thinking about beyond the 45 days, a strong, ongoing relationship ensures the family is openly sharing their priorities, concerns, and throughout their journey. This collaborative relationship leads to open communication and a fluid IFSP process where the IFSP can be reviewed and adjusted as the child and the family's needs evolve. Now we will begin to put it all together and walk through how the information gathered through strong relationships and authentic assessment translates directly into a high-quality IFSP, beginning with Section 3 of the IFSP. Keep in mind as we go through this process all of the wonderful strategies that Erin shared. When you understand what information needs to be documented in each section of the IFSP, teams can be intentional about gathering information from families during intake, evaluation, assessment, and ensuring that they are only asking relevant questions that contribute to developing a high-quality IFSP. Just as a reminder about this section, because we've received a lot of questions and there's been some confusion, the first portion of Section 3 is where the qualified personnel members of the team documents the child and family assessment completion dates, including the dates of each of the required child assessment activities when they were completed and or reviewed. We're just wanting to provide some clarification as there's been some confusion. All of the bulleted activities listed in this section, aside from other, are specified within Ohio Administrative Code and are required to be conducted or reviewed as part of child assessment. The dates of the assessment activities do not have to be at the same time. The activities can be completed on different dates. However, the date of the last activity requirement will be used as the completion date of the child assessment, meaning assessment was finished on this date, even if it was started on an earlier date. As we work through the different sections of the IFSP, I would like you to think about what we are asking a family to share just after meeting us. How can you create a safe space for a family to be comfortable with being vulnerable? How do you explain to the family why you are asking the questions needed to complete each section? What do you share with the family about how you were used the information? If you take the time to ask a question, the family is going to think that it is important for you to know. How then are you documenting that information on the IFSP? Each member of the team plays a role in connecting with and creating a safe space for families. The service coordinator as the initial face and voice of EI. Every interaction has the opportunity to be a building block of that relationship. And as new faces are introduced and invited into the family's life, everything said, both verbally and non-verbally, either adds a block to the foundation or takes one away. It is our responsibility to remember that although as a part of our job, we've had many conversations before and are very familiar with our lingo, our forms, and our processes. But most often, this is the very first time that an individual family has been a part of early intervention and are hearing everything for the first time. Please keep in mind as you interact with every family how you take in new information. 65% of people are visual learners. How are we using that as we're going through and explaining all of our forms, processes, and using our lingo? As an EI team, everyone is responsible for documenting and sharing all of the information that was shared with them by the family. So let's take a minute and think about the why behind this section of the IFSP. Why is it important to understand the parts of the day that are the easiest, most enjoyable? And what is most challenging and frustrating? Consider how hard it might be for a parent to share what is challenging or frustrating. Do you think that there might be fear of being judged? How do you build a relationship from your first interaction that leads to a parent opening up about the frustrating parts of their day? When we are reviewing IFSPs, this section often has very little information. If parents are not sharing the information, then we have to ask ourselves why. What can we do to build a relationship so that they are comfortable sharing about their day? How do you explain why you are asking and how that information will be used? Why do we need to know about what makes an activity or routine go well? How will you use that information when considering potential outcomes and strategies? The rich information that is learned during your conversation about their day can lead into deeper conversations for the rest of the child assessment, and then can be used for outcomes and strategies. When you know the family's routines, getting dressed, playing in the kitchen center, bedtime, running errands, it makes it easier to write outcomes and weave strategies into their existing moments and activities. It helps to show the families that they can support their child without needing extra time, materials, or expertise. The assessment summary paints a picture of the child's present levels of development, how the child uses skills to participate in their everyday life, and the impact of their skills and behaviors on the child's daily routines and activities. Completion of these sections assists the IFS team with developing IFSP outcomes. The relationship you build with the family is the guiding force. We know that assessment is a process of gathering information to make decisions. A strong, trusting relationship must be in place in order for the family to feel comfortable sharing information. Assessment informs intervention, and as a result, is a critical component of the services delivered. The info we gather through assessment process directly informs, shapes the IFSP. How do you present the purpose of assessment to the parent? How do you show the parent that the questions you have asked have a purpose, and shows the parent that we listened and that we were intentional? Teams, including the parent caregiver, should be involved in this conversation around the cause and document the appropriate statement for each of the 3 functional areas prior to developing the outcomes. All team members must be able to understand, explain the cause process, and answer any questions the family has. It is the responsibility of the Early Intervention Service Coordinator to ensure that the information gathering and documentation of the child outcome summary statements is completed by the assessment team. Either the service coordinator or the child assessment team can lead the conversation through the decision tree. And remember, 65% of people are visual learners. How are you using our tools that we have to make this a visual process for parents? Parent involvement and input for choosing the appropriate cause statement is critical. Think about the last cause conversation that you had with a parent. Did you work through the decision tree together, discussing each decision and working your way to the final decision? Or did you start the conversation off with your thoughts? How the conversation was held either embrace the family as a vital member of the team or give the view of the EI staff being the experts? Like the child assessment, the family-directed assessment is critical to developing meaningful, high-quality child and or family IFSP outcomes. When completing this section of the IFSP, it is important to ensure that the information you are documenting clearly describes how the concerns, priorities, and resources relate to the family's routines and activities. When reviewing IFSPs, most of the time we see very little information captured here. This confuses us, and maybe families as well. The FDA requires a tool to be used to capture rich information about the family. Think about the investment of time that was spent building the relationship and asking your questions. The IFSP should reflect that investment in getting to know the family. We want there to be consistency across the IFSP. If a part of the day is not going well, and the family's primary concern is the child's communication, it makes sense that what makes it challenging includes how communication impacts it, as well as explaining it in the FDA as part of the concern section, and in the priority section, reflecting that the family's desire is for their child to improve their speech communication as a result of receiving EI. If you are describing information in the child's history summary, such as pediatrician, outpatient, etc., how are you then incorporating those resources into the FDA summary and also using them as outcome supports? When completing the FDA summary section, take time To review, reflect, and ask yourself, do the concerns I've captured relate to the family's priorities? Do the concerns and priorities then relate to IFSP outcomes that are developed? Are the family's resources being considered and utilized as outcome supports? The FDA is the one activity families have the option to decline and still receive EI services. This means that it is even more important that it be presented in a way that shows families why we're gathering this information and why it's so critical. Emphasis should be on the importance of gathering the information, not on the fact that it's optional or not required. When families understand the why, they are much more likely to consent to participate. The number of families declining to participate in the FDA should be very minimal. If you start to notice that you have a high decline rate, it's important that you closely examine how the FDA is being explained, presented to parents. Our FDA is being clearly explained, and how is the information gathered during the FDA used to develop the IFSP that truly reflects the child and the family? So we're going to take a minute to pause and reflect. What approaches do you use to ensure families feel included, heard, and valued during IFSP meetings? If a family were to leave the IFSP meeting feeling heard and empowered, what did you do to help with that? What did you do to encourage the family to feel included when developing the IFSP in writing outcomes, identifying strategies, and services? How can a strong relationship with families lead to a more functional, participant-based outcome? How does your understanding of the family's daily routines help with developing a meaningful outcome or meaningful IFSP? Outcomes. This is where we take all of that great information that parents have shared with us and create a vision of where the parents want to go. How do they want an activity or routine to look? What is needed for that to happen? By the time we get here, we should know what the family wants to happen. What do they want it to look like in the morning when they're trying to get everyone out of the house? What would they like it to look like when they're moving from playing outside to coming in for bath time? How do they want it to look when they're walking from the car into the store? The IFSP is an agreement about the focus of intervention and how services and supports will be provided. This means that there must be a clear connection between the information the evaluation team and the evaluation and assessment team and the family provided, and how the outcomes support the child's ability to participate in the family's daily routines and activities. The IFSP team, including the family, service coordinator, and providers, document specifically what will occur to help the family and child achieve the outcome. These steps must be individualized for each child and family to support how children learn and build upon child and family interests, familiar activities, and routines. Where in the process did you gather this information? Is it documented on the IFSP? Is there a clear connection between all of that information to the outcome, including the activity and routine of the outcome and the strategies? Families are more invested if they can see what it looks like at the end. How does Carol use words to say what she wants during play versus Carol will use words to label foods when playing in the kitchen center, which allows a parent to know what the outcome looks like and clearly know what they're working on. We need to be more specific in digging into into those routines. We need to know what's working well and not working well. What do they like? What are their interests? So that we can really personalize that outcome to that child and that family and embed their interests throughout that outcome, in the strategies, so that it's meaningful to them. The federal government gives families 9 months to prepare for transition from early intervention. How are we utilizing this time to help them prepare? Transition outcomes is their plan to determine what they need right now to be ready to end their EI journey. Each plan should be written to give the family child the time they need to prepare for transition. When you introduce transition to a family, how do you explain your role in the transition process? A transition plan is the outcome with steps and services. It must be added to the IFSP no more than 9 months, but no less than 90 days prior to the child's third birthday. Please keep in mind that this is a separate requirement from the TPC. If a TPC needs to be rescheduled for after the 90 days, before a child turns 3, the NCR does not apply to the transition plan. It only applies to the TPC. Future resources, placements, and/or services section is part of that planning. Even if the family is thinking about waiting a year to go to preschool, what are the resources they may need over the next year? Maybe parent groups, play groups, library story times, outpatient therapy. There should always be something listed in this box. How are you getting the information when the parent is not planning for their child to go to preschool, or feels that their child may not need preschool or may not qualify for preschool? Child transition outcomes specifically focus on what the child may have difficulty with or may need additional services to thrive in future settings and routines. Family transition outcomes should be related to the supports the parent needs, particularly needs to feel supported, needs to support their child in a new setting, practice for a new setting, or learn about a new setting. Steps and activities related to transition at age 3 need to clearly identify how the team is going to help the child and family adjust to a new setting. So one last pause and reflect for today. What is a new strategy or approach that you could try to strengthen your connection with families during the first 45 days? I'm going to pass it on to Erin. You're muted, Erin.
And I need to go back to that last slide too. Nope, I don't want that. There we go. Okay. So as we start to wrap up today's session, we wanted to take a moment and really thank you all for the incredible work that you do every single day in Ohio's early intervention system. Building those trusting, strong relationships with children and families is really at the heart of high quality services. And it's because of your commitment, compassion, and expertise that families feel supported and empowered. Committing to developing those meaningful, high quality IFSPs ensures that families are equal partners in the process and that children receive the support that they need to thrive. We know that this work is not easy, but the impact that you make is immeasurable and long lasting. So on behalf of our entire state EI team, thank you. Thank you for showing up for families, for honoring their strengths, and for helping to shape brighter futures for Ohio's youngest children. With this in mind, we wanted to share some of the quotes that have been shared by families in the State Fiscal 25 Family Questionnaire that support the importance of building strong relationships and acknowledge the amazing work that you all do. So this is our why. I will leave these up and let you read and then progress slowly. Just a side note, I want to say that this reviewing the family questionnaire comments has been like an honor, and it is my favorite task out of anything I do within my job here. It really does show the impact that you all are making on families. And so I hope that you take these and they stick with you as you move forward. I'm going to pass it off to Karen to kind of wrap things up now.
So I guess I lied earlier. There is one more pause and reflect. So how could your team build in more opportunities for self-reflection about your relationship with families? Thinking about all those interactions that you have, what can you do to reflect upon your relationships with families? And that can be a celebration. It can be, how do we do this better? But I think it should be both. You should celebrate your relationships with families as well. And the last is if you have any questions about anything that you heard today, please reach out to your program consultant, and we will be more than happy to talk to you about any of your questions. And then we do have some resources on the next slide that we use in our presentation if you would like to look at them further. But thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Erin and Karen, for joining us today and presenting for us.